One of the most underrated yet neurologically potent habits you can adopt is exposing yourself to natural sunlight early in the day, ideally within the first hour of waking. This habit, although simple, initiates a powerful cascade of biological and neurological processes that can set the tone for optimal mental and physical functioning throughout your day. What happens when light hits your eyes in the early morning is not just a passive event, it's a biological trigger that affects your alertness, hormonal balance, energy levels, and sleep quality. It shifts your body from a rest state into a wakeful state by activating specific brain circuits and releasing key neuromodulators that enhance mood, cognition, and motivation. When sunlight enters your eyes through exposure, not looking directly at the sun, it activates specialized cells in the retina known as intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, IPRGCs. These cells are not responsible for forming images, but for detecting light intensity and sending that information directly to a part of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, SCN. The SCN acts as your brain's master circadian clock. It governs sleep-wake cycles, metabolic activity, hormone production, and even mood regulation. That early burst of light synchronizes this internal clock with the external environment, ensuring that your biological processes are aligned with the day ahead. The morning light exposure also triggers a sharp rise in cortisol, a healthy, natural spike that is often misunderstood. This isn't the stress cortisol surge that comes with anxiety. It's a functional, beneficial rise that promotes alertness, immune function, and metabolic readiness. Additionally, light exposure in the morning boosts the release of dopamine, a key neuromodulator associated with motivation, drive, and goal-directed behavior. This dopamine pulse helps you feel energized, focused, and emotionally balanced throughout the day. Importantly, getting sunlight in the morning doesn't just improve how you feel for a few hours. It initiates a feedback loop that enhances your entire 24-hour rhythm. Exposure to bright, natural light early in the day sets a timer in your brain that will influence the timing of melatonin release later that evening. Melatonin, the hormone responsible for sleep onset and quality, begins to rise approximately 14 to 16 hours after that initial light exposure. In this way, morning light doesn't just wake you up, it programs your body for deeper, more restorative sleep later that night, which then supports recovery, memory consolidation, emotional regulation, and cellular repair. Many people mistakenly believe they need to overhaul their entire life to feel better, focus better, or sleep better, but often it starts with a 2-minute step outside in the morning, even if it's cloudy. On overcast days, the light intensity outdoors is still significantly higher than any indoor lighting. A minimum of 5-10 minutes is ideal on sunny days and about 15-20 minutes on overcast days. The light doesn't need to be direct. You simply need to be outside where natural light can reach your eyes, unfiltered by windows, glasses, or sunglasses. This daily exposure also has psychological effects. By orienting your brain toward an external focus early in the day, you shift attention away from internal ruminations or anxieties. Morning light viewing is like a biological reset that aligns your mental framework with the physical world. This anchoring has been shown to improve mental health outcomes, particularly in people who struggle with seasonal affective disorder, depression, or anxiety. The reason is that light exposure, especially in the early part of the day, enhances serotonin production, a chemical associated with mood stabilization and well-being. When this habit becomes consistent, it establishes a neural pattern of reliable wakefulness and evening readiness for sleep. It strengthens the body's circadian rhythm, making it more resistant to disruptions caused by irregular schedules, screen time, or travel. It also improves your brain's ability to stay focused across the day because dopamine and norepinephrine systems are more active and better regulated. With more regulated neuromodulators, your executive functions like planning, concentration, decision-making, and emotional control become more stable and resilient under stress or distraction. The foundational idea here is that your brain isn't a machine that simply turns on when you wake up. It needs input, and the most important input it receives is light. Light is the signal that says it's time to be alert, productive, and clear-minded, and without that signal, your biology runs on guesswork, drifting between states of fatigue, restlessness, or anxiety. When it comes to personal transformation, people often think they need to take massive, dramatic actions But neuroscience shows that small doses of voluntary discomfort applied regularly and intentionally can reshape the brain for resilience, focus, and growth. The concept is not about suffering for the sake of it, but about activating a particular neural mechanism that only kicks in when the brain senses challenge and unpredictability. This is called neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to adapt, change, and rewire based on experience. And neuroplasticity is most active when you do something unfamiliar or difficult. That's why building the daily habit of deliberately stepping into discomfort, however small, can become one of the most powerful tools for long-term change. Doing one uncomfortable thing each day might look like starting a conversation you've been avoiding, waking up earlier than your usual time, finishing a task you dislike, or even taking a cold shower. Each of these actions engages the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making, planning, and executive control. When you override the default impulse to avoid discomfort, you strengthen the neural circuits associated with discipline and emotional regulation. Over time, this consistent override builds what's known as top-down control, your brain's ability to regulate fear, procrastination, and reactive behavior in favor of intentional, value-based action. From a neurological perspective, discomfort activates the autonomic nervous system, particularly the sympathetic branch that prepares your body for action. Heart rate increases slightly, pupils dilate, and your brain shifts into a state of heightened alertness. If that discomfort is voluntary, meaning you've chosen to face it, the brain doesn't interpret it as a threat, but rather as a challenge. This triggers the release of norepinephrine and dopamine. Norepinephrine increases focus and mental clarity, while dopamine not only enhances motivation, but creates a feeling of satisfaction after the task is completed. By voluntarily stepping into discomfort, you're tapping into the same neuromodulatory systems that fuel progress, motivation, and internal reward. There is also a psychological transformation that occurs when you repeat this practice over time. You begin to shift your identity, not by affirmations or visualization, but through action. Every time you face something hard, your brain records that experience as evidence that you are capable, disciplined, and committed. This changes how you perceive future challenges. Instead of asking, "Can I do this?" your brain starts defaulting to, "How do I do this?" That subtle shift in framing is what separates people who grow consistently from those who remain stuck in cycles of avoidance and anxiety. The science behind this is grounded in the reinforcement of behavior loops. The more you engage in a behavior that produces a dopamine response, the more likely you are to repeat it. When the behavior is facing discomfort, the loop becomes one of courage and forward movement. There's also a connection between deliberate discomfort and increased cognitive flexibility. When you put yourself in novel or challenging situations, even briefly, you encourage the brain to form new neural connections. This expands your adaptive capacity, which is your brain's ability to deal with uncertainty, unpredictability, and change. In today's world where distractions are constant and stress is often chronic, this kind of mental training is invaluable. You're not just toughening up for the sake of pride. You're training your nervous system to remain stable under pressure, which translates into better decision-making, stronger relationships, and higher overall performance. Moreover, facing discomfort disrupts the brain's habit loops that are formed around safety and predictability. While those loops can be helpful in reducing anxiety, they also limit your growth. When you do the same easy things repeatedly, the brain reduces energy expenditure, relying on established circuits. But growth requires metabolic cost. Your brain needs to burn energy to form new connections. The only way to stimulate that process is to expose it to something novel or effortful. That's why discomfort, especially when it's chosen, not imposed, becomes the fuel for adaptability. It tells your brain, something important is happening here. Pay attention, mobilize resources, and get stronger from this. Even a small act of discomfort can have compounding effects. For instance, if you're someone who avoids confrontation, sending a difficult email or having a direct conversation can rewire how your brain processes conflict. If you're someone who procrastinates, doing the most difficult task first thing in the morning not only gets it done, but also trains your dopamine system to associate action with relief and reward. Each one of these actions creates a data point that reshapes your perception of what you're capable of handling. You start to become the kind of person who runs toward challenge, not away from it. That identity shift is not philosophical, it's structural. It's etched into the firing patterns of your neurons, the regulation of your neurotransmitters, and the adaptive wiring of your brain's executive systems. The brain begins to anticipate discomfort not as a threat, but as an opportunity, and that is the essence of real personal power. Journaling is often thought of as a reflective emotional practice, but at its core, it's a precision tool for training the brain to focus, process, and execute. When used intentionally, journaling taps into specific neural circuits responsible for attention, memory consolidation, emotional regulation, and action planning. What appears to be a simple act of putting pen to paper is, neurologically speaking, a deliberate engagement of the brain's prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for higher order thinking, planning, and decision making. And when you make this a daily habit, even for 5 minutes in the morning, you begin to rewire your cognitive systems to become more aligned with clarity, control, and goal-directed behavior. The reason journaling is so powerful lies in how the brain prioritizes information. Throughout the day, your nervous system is flooded with sensory inputs, visual, auditory, emotional. And without structure, your mind defaults to distraction. Writing down your thoughts creates a filtering mechanism. It gives your brain permission to offload irrelevant or looping thoughts, and in doing so, frees up working memory. This is critical because working memory is like the RAM of your brain. It's limited in capacity, but essential for everything from problem solving to focus. By journaling, you're essentially decluttering your cognitive bandwidth, allowing the mind to operate with more precision and efficiency. There's also a direct link between journaling and the activation of the brain's goal orientation systems. When you write down your objectives, both long-term aspirations and immediate tasks, you stimulate the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and anterior cingulate cortex. These regions are involved in evaluating actions, monitoring performance, and regulating effort. Writing a goal, even vaguely, shifts the brain into a state of expectancy. This process, called goal priming, makes you more likely to notice cues in your environment that are related to those goals. Your brain begins to filter the world through a lens of relevance, essentially telling itself, this is what we're looking for. Let's stay alert for it. This filtering system is known as the reticular activating system, RAS, a network in the brainstem that regulates wakefulness and attention. When you journal about what matters to you, you're programming your RAS to highlight and prioritize information aligned with your values and objectives. This doesn't just increase your productivity, it sharpens your intuition. You begin to sense patterns, opportunities, and feedback loops that would otherwise go unnoticed. And what's critical is that this process becomes more refined the more you practice it. With repetition, your brain develops a stronger neural association between written intention and behavioral execution. Journaling also has a profound effect on emotional regulation. When you put feelings or internal conflicts into language, you activate the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, which plays a key role in reducing amygdala activity, the brain's fear and anxiety center. This practice, known as affect labeling, is not just therapeutic, it's functional. It gives you emotional distance, enabling you to evaluate your reactions from a more rational standpoint. Instead of being overwhelmed by emotions, you become the observer of them, which leads to more adaptive responses and less reactive behavior. When journaling becomes a habit, the brain starts associating the act with a transition into clarity and readiness. It becomes a ritual that primes not just the mind, but also the body for movement, decision, and momentum. Over time, it can also reshape your identity by reinforcing the narrative that you are a person who reflects, learns, and takes control of your life's direction. That reinforcement builds consistency, which is key to establishing long-term behavioral change. And from a neural standpoint, every time you write and then act in alignment with what you wrote, you reinforce the synaptic pathways between intention and these are the exact circuits you want to be strong if you're aiming to develop discipline, self-awareness, and the ability to stay focused under pressure. It's important to note that the structure of your journaling matters. A scattered brain needs structure to sharpen itself. Begin by writing down 3 key prompts. What do I need to do today? Why does it matter? How do I want to feel while doing it? These prompts activate different networks in the brain: executive function, emotional processing, and motivational pathways. You're not just writing, you're engaging the full spectrum of cognitive systems that drive behavior. Over time, this alignment between thought and action becomes automatic. Your brain learns to predict that writing equals direction and direction equals results. And as those results accumulate, so does your belief in your own capacity to influence outcomes, which neurologically strengthens the dopaminergic systems associated with agency, motivation, and follow-through. This loop of intention, clarity, and execution becomes the mental architecture for real, lasting change. Creating new habits can feel overwhelming, not because the behavior is inherently difficult, but because the brain resists change that doesn't follow an existing structure. One of the most powerful ways to overcome this resistance is through a method called habit stacking. This concept involves pairing a new desired habit with a behavior that is already firmly embedded in your daily routine. The neuroscience behind this is rooted in how the brain creates and reinforces neural pathways. When a new action is linked to a familiar one, the brain doesn't have to build a brand new circuit from scratch. Instead, it modifies and extends a well-worn pathway, making the new habit far more likely to stick. The human brain thrives on predictability. It is constantly seeking to conserve energy by automating repeated behaviors. This is why brushing your teeth, checking your phone, or tying your shoes don't require conscious effort. They've been encoded in the basal ganglia, the brain's habit center. When you attach a new behavior to an existing one, you take advantage of this automation system. You're essentially piggybacking on a neural process that's already stable, which reduces cognitive load and increases behavioral consistency. Let's say you want to begin a breathwork practice for calming your nervous system. If you simply try to remember to do it sometime during the day, it's unlikely to become a consistent habit. But if you attach it to something reliable, such as brushing your teeth, you create a clear cue and action sequence. After I brush my teeth, I'll do 60 seconds of box breathing. That existing behavior becomes the anchor, and the breath work becomes the new action. Over time, the brain begins to associate these behaviors with each other, reinforcing the new loop through a process called Hebbian learning. Neurons that fire together wire together. The key to successful habit stacking is clarity and specificity. The brain doesn't respond well to vague intentions. Telling yourself, I'll try to meditate today, doesn't activate a strong enough intention circuit. But saying, after I pour my morning coffee, I'll sit for 2 minutes in silence, links the new habit to a specific trigger. This increases the likelihood that your brain will recognize the cue, recall the desired action, and perform it without internal negotiation. With repetition, the stacked habit becomes a predictable sequence, and the brain begins to expect and prepare for it in advance. That preparation involves changes in neuromodulators like dopamine and acetylcholine, which prime the brain for focus and reward anticipation. There's also a motivational benefit that arises from using habit stacking. When you begin with something familiar and easy, it reduces psychological resistance. Completing a small, established action creates a sense of progress, which increases the probability of following through on the new behavior. This taps into the reward system, particularly the release of dopamine, which is not just a feel-good chemical, but a signal of forward movement. Dopamine rises when you anticipate a reward, and habit stacking creates reliable anticipatory cues that reinforce behavior. The satisfaction of completion, even in a small task, creates a loop that motivates you to continue building on that sequence. Additionally, habit stacking improves long-term memory encoding. When new information or behavior is paired with something familiar, the hippocampus, the brain's memory consolidation center, forms stronger associations. This is why learning is enhanced when it's tied to routines. It's also why many successful people attribute their growth not to massive changes, but to small, layered routines built over time. By adding micro behaviors to fixed points in your day, you're not just building habits, you're restructuring how your brain views time, identity, and action. The flexibility of habit stacking allows you to strategically target different areas of personal development. If your goal is physical health, you might stack 10 push-ups after you put on your workout clothes. If you're working on emotional awareness, you might take 60 seconds to write a gratitude note after you drink water in the morning. The point is not just the habit, but the structure surrounding it. Behavior change is about consistency, and consistency is about structure that the brain can trust. When the brain trusts a pattern, it stops questioning the effort, and that's when transformation begins to accelerate. You reduce the need for motivation by increasing the reliability of environmental and behavioral cues, which strengthens the automation of positive routines and gradually replaces reactive patterns with intentional, aligned actions. Over time, the compound effect of these small stacked habits rewires your identity, increases self-efficacy, and upgrades your baseline for what feels normal, effective, and achievable. In a world where constant stimulation is the norm, endless scrolling, rapid notifications, nonstop background noise, the human brain is under persistent pressure to remain alert and reactive. While it may seem like a necessity of modern life, this constant engagement with external inputs gradually depletes a critical neurochemical, dopamine. Dopamine is essential for drive, motivation, focus, and emotional regulation, but just like any system in the body, it can become desensitized through overuse. When you're constantly feeding your brain with small hits of dopamine through social media, email, entertainment, or multitasking, the receptors that process this neuromodulator begin to downregulate. This leads to a reduced sensitivity to reward, decreased motivation, and difficulty concentrating. One of the most effective yet overlooked ways to restore dopamine sensitivity is through deliberate stillness. Short periods of intentional, quiet disengagement from stimulation. Deliberate stillness is not the same as meditation, though it can include similar principles. It is the act of stepping away from all cognitive input. No music, no screens, no movement, no mental work, for a short, defined time. This period of low sensory engagement allows the dopaminergic system in the brain to reset. During stimulation-heavy periods, dopamine levels rise, and while this provides temporary energy and excitement, it can lead to a crash if sustained too long. By entering a state of stillness, the brain recalibrates baseline dopamine levels and restores its ability to respond to meaningful challenges and rewards. Neuroscientifically, this process is supported by changes in receptor activity and neural firing patterns in the mesolimbic pathway, the circuit responsible for reward, motivation, and learning. In overstimulated states, neurons in this pathway become hyperactive, leading to what's known as dopamine burnout. This is when people feel unmotivated, bored, or restless, even in the presence of exciting goals. Deliberate stillness reduces this noise, giving your receptors time to resensitize and allowing you to once again feel motivation from internal goals rather than constant external triggers. This habit can be as short as 5 to 10 minutes and is most effective when done at key transition points during the day. After a long work session, following exposure to intense emotional or digital stimulation, or when you sense mental fatigue setting in. Sit in a quiet space, keep your eyes closed or softly focused, and do nothing, not even controlled breathing. Let your brain and body fall into a low intake state. What happens during this time is a return to neural homeostasis. Systems like the default mode network, which is active during introspective rest, begin to dominate. This network allows the brain to integrate past experiences, make sense of emotions, and recover mental energy. Stillness also enhances alpha brainwave activity, which is associated with creativity, calm, and openness. When alpha waves increase, they inhibit the sensory processing regions of the brain, reducing reactivity and increasing inner awareness. This allows for a natural replenishment of cognitive energy and primes the brain for deeper focus in the next task. It's a powerful antidote to mental fatigue, and unlike scrolling through social media or consuming content, it doesn't spike dopamine in ways that deplete your reserves. Instead, it allows your dopamine circuitry to breathe, to rest, and to become sensitive again to natural sources of satisfaction and purpose. Integrating deliberate stillness into your daily routine doesn't require a major shift in lifestyle. You can stack it onto existing routines right after lunch, before switching tasks, or as a reset between meetings. The brain responds exceptionally well to rhythms. And by making stillness a rhythm in your day, you condition your nervous system to enter recovery mode more efficiently. Over time, you'll notice greater clarity, improved emotional regulation, and more sustained attention across your day. What's even more powerful is the feedback loop created by this practice. As your brain becomes more sensitive to dopamine, even small accomplishments begin to feel rewarding again. a finished task, a walk in the sun, a meaningful conversation. These ordinary experiences start lighting up your reward circuitry in ways that were previously dulled. That's when behavior change accelerates, because you're no longer chasing high-intensity stimulation to feel motivated. Your baseline for reward begins to shift toward the things that truly matter to you. You become less reactive and more grounded, less dependent on distraction, and more grounded and focused. And it all begins with a few minutes of intentional disengagement from the noise, allowing your brain's chemistry to reset and your nervous system to recenter around clarity, focus, and internal drive. The quality of your sleep determines the quality of your life. Your focus, your energy, your immune resilience, your emotional stability, and even your long-term brain health are all deeply influenced by the patterns you set in the final hour before bed. One of the most powerful yet consistently overlooked habits is crafting an intentional wind down routine in the evening that sends a clear biological signal to your brain. It's time to transition from alertness to rest. This isn't about using willpower to force sleep. It's about leveraging neuroscience to align your internal state with the natural rhythms of your body, particularly your circadian clock, which regulates the sleep-wake cycle. The circadian rhythm is a roughly 24-hour internal clock governed by the suprachiasmatic nucleus, SCN, in the hypothalamus. This structure responds to external cues, primarily light and darkness, to synchronize functions like hormone release, temperature regulation, and sleep onset. In the evening, as natural light diminishes, your SCN begins to instruct the pineal gland to release melatonin, a hormone that induces drowsiness and lowers core body temperature. However, when artificial light, especially blue light from screens and overhead lighting, remains present late into the evening, the brain interprets this as a signal that it's still daytime. This delays melatonin production, disrupts sleep timing, and compromises sleep depth. A highly effective habit for optimizing this transition is reducing artificial light exposure approximately 1 hour before bed. Dimming lights and avoiding screens help simulate the natural sunset signal that your brain evolved to respond to over thousands of years. Even brief exposure to bright light during this critical window can suppress melatonin secretion, elevate cortisol levels, and delay sleep onset. Instead, use warm, low-intensity lighting, ideally under 50 lux, which is enough to navigate your environment but not enough to disrupt your circadian rhythm. If screen use is unavoidable, employing blue light filters or glasses that block the 450, 480 M wavelength can reduce the negative impact on sleep, promoting hormone regulation. In addition to light management, the evening wind down routine benefits greatly from consistent behavioral cues. The brain learns through repetition and association. So when you engage in the same calming activities every night before sleep, such as reading a physical book, journaling, stretching, or practicing slow breathing, you're training your nervous system to enter